Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the nighttime shift of the Auckland Council. Sitting this evening to consider the Regional Land Transport Plan, or at least seeking an endorsement from the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. I'll just quickly dispense with the formality so we can quickly get on to this, and I have received an offer from the presenters to be as expeditious as possible in the presentation, especially given that we have been through a fairly long and tortuous process with respect of this item over a number of weeks now. Okay, so I'll announce the councillors who are online. Member Billy Brown and councillors Ferry, Filipina, Fully, Leone, Turner, Walker, Newman, and member Renata. Is there any that need to be added to that, Lara? No, that'll do. So we go to item 1 is apologies. Okay, moved by councillor Simpson, second by councillor Fletcher, and we have councillor Dalton registered there, and early departure from councillor Fully. Is there any others? It's okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 2, any declarations of interest? There are none. 3, there are no petitions. 4, there's no public input for this. As with 5, local board, there's none with that. 6, no extraordinary items have been brought to our attention, which brings us to the item, the Regional Land Transport Plan. And without any further ado, I'll hand over to, I think Hamish is doing the main presentation here, and we welcome Richard Leggett as Chair of Auckland Transport as well. So over to whoever's leading off there.
Thank you, Councillor Watson, and kia ora koutou. I'll make a few introductory comments. So you've all seen the draft. There aren't too many changes from the draft. This has been a complex and challenging process that's been very time constrained, and the Regional Transport Committee is a new committee. So actually there's, in terms of the personnel, none of us had been through, apart from Gwyneth, the process fully before. So it has been time consuming, but I'm very happy as chair of that body that we've ended up with a good outcome. We have worked, and Hamish and the executive and the council team and NZTA and Kiwi Rail have worked well together. We are aligned with, we believe, closely aligned with council through your desires out of the LTP, and also meet the requirements of the Land Transport Act to be consistent with the GPS. And this committee, the Transport and Infrastructure Committee, has had a number of workshops to go through the RLTP. So I think the process has been pretty good. It is very clear in the document that public transport and renewals are the two key areas where we want discretionary funding to go. And that is consistent with the feedback we have had. We have had over 13,000 submissions, and they also support public transport and renewals. So fit for purpose assets and a great public transport system. The other thing that came out of the submissions was the fact that state highways were in the draft at a lower level than the public wanted. So that has been elevated from 4th to 3rd. However, as I'll repeat again, PT and renewals are significantly ahead, and that's where we are wanting government through the NLTP to provide a decent chunk of money. Hamish is going to take you through the details in the document. Overall, the RLTP is a product of a lot of work. We're happy with where we have got to, and on behalf of the Regional Transport Committee, I recommend that you endorse this plan so we can take it forward and make our case to Wellington. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I won't go through the presentation. I suppose the key points to make is to follow up with what Richard said. We're now at the point of finalising this plan, and we're seeking your endorsement before it goes to the Auckland Transport Board next week, and we need to submit it to the NZTA on the 31st to make sure that, you know, the new plan is reflected, or else we revert to the 2021 plan. We had the draft RLTP endorsed by this committee back in May, and after that we went through the consultation process. We ran an extensive consultation process and received over 13,000 pieces of feedback and responses to the survey directly, plus over 100 written submissions from around Auckland. So that was more than twice what we received last time. And, you know, the overwhelming majority of feedback about that was a strong preference for investment in public transport infrastructure, followed up by local roads. And then after that, as Richard has said, state highways was kind of the next preference, followed by walking and cycling and safety. So that's some of the feedback that we received. Of course, there were many other requests for other changes and modifications, you know, to reflect the interests of stakeholders and local issues. So unfortunately, there's a whole range of things that we were not able to address within that due to funding constraints. But overwhelmingly, you know, it was a support for the direction of the RLTP. One of the shifts, the changes that we have made, as Richard has said, is in response to that feedback. We've agreed to elevate state highways in terms of the ranking to rank number 3. That aligns with the feedback that we got from the public. But we think also supports our general case to the NZTA in particular, that we are saying the public fundamentally are supportive of the emphasis on public transport infrastructure. But if we're going to take the public support there, then we think we also need to acknowledge what they've said about state highways as well, in terms of how we shape the overall ranking. Other changes to the document reflect the decisions at the end of the long-term plan process, where additional funding was provided, and that's been allocated to the Takanini to make sure that we can complete, subject to NZTA funding, the Takanini level crossings project, and also improve, allocate more funding to park and ride as well, which was one of the themes that came through from the submissions, and particularly from local boards. And then finally, we've made some adjustments to timing of some smaller programs, particularly in response to feedback around the Unsealed Roads Improvement Program. So we've made some adjustments there. So those are the kind of major changes that we've made. So overall, as Richard has said, this is a document that proposes $63 billion worth of investment. We are seeking from that around about $41 billion from the National Land Transport Fund, and that's what really this document is all about. It's signalling to the NZTA, this is where the Auckland region's priorities lie, and the clear thing that has emerged, as Richard has said, is we need to ensure that we're getting the maintenance operations and particularly renewals right. We need to fully fund our public transport services going into the future. We need to complete the committed projects that are underway. And in terms of new things, the overwhelming priority that our merit-based assessment and the public feedback has come back, and it said public transport infrastructure is the priority, and that's what we're saying, followed by local road improvements, state highways, and walking and cycling. So that's the kind of overarching direction here. There is a risk, you know, we're not going to get all of that funding, and some of the main risks that we see are to the public transport infrastructure class. So I guess what we're saying through this document, the signal that we want to send to NZTA is that more money needs to be allocated to that class to reflect regional priorities, to reflect the public feedback, and to make sure that the plan works. So we're really seeking your endorsement here today to help us send that message through this plan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Hamish. I'll open up to any questions of clarification and make them pretty succinct, please. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all of the work on this. I know how much has gone on behind the scenes here. I also know that we have a really frustrating methodology and governance, and I'm very sympathetic to the advocacy that the Mayor is trying to bring on this. So I am very supportive of what you want to do, and I'm happy to move or second today. The only concern I've got is in supporting this, where do all of the plethora of other plans for Auckland Transport, like the RPTP, where do they actually sit in terms of assumptions that we might make?
Thank you. So, you know, the main other area, Regional Land Transport Plan primarily focused on setting out our priorities for capital investment, but it also includes the amount of funding that we are proposing to, is required to achieve our regional public transport plan and our maintenance and operations. But they're at a very high level. The detail of exactly what will go on in terms of public transport services is set out in the regional public transport plan. This plan doesn't deal with the detail of yeah, as I said, public transport services. It's really just setting out, hey, we think we need $14 billion over 10 years to fund all the services that we think are required.
I appreciate that, and I realise at a strategic level that's what we're doing, but just as being burnt in the past, I don't want to feel that in endorsing this today that gives licence to any matters that may have been perhaps not considered thoroughly. And in this, I want to bring specific attention to the failure to fully consult, and I bring the concerns that have been brought to me by the Albert Eden Local Board and the Mount Eden Business Association on the Outer Link bus link. That is one of the most popular routes, as you'd be aware, in Auckland, and I would like to see that if there are going to be any changes there, that there is complete transparency and full consultation with us all, because that, until such time as the CRL is operational, there were those of us who were concerned about this going back 2015, 2016, which is why we got Route 64 off the ground, that would not be reconsidered again until such time as the CRL got off the ground. So I'm looking for a belts and braces response from you today to say that, yes, we can deal with that in another committee at another time through TIC, but this will not in any way confirm proposed changes to the Outer Link.
This, whether or not you endorse this RLTP, does not impact the changes to the Outer Link.
Can you then, to speed things up today, at the next TIC committee, can you bring the matter from Auckland Transport to the TIC committee, and so we can have a discussion about the Outer Link?
I think, Councillor Fletcher, it's probably even more simple than that. We'll just find out from Stacey what's happening, because it's in a different plan. I think the first answer to your question is that if we receive our public transport funding that we are requesting in the RLTP, then the plans that are in the public transport paper plan will be able to be delivered.
That's fine.
And the question
so
is...
The question is the status of the RPTP.
Yep, we'll find out. I'll get Stacey to come back to you.
That's fantastic, and I'm happy to move or second. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that those sort of queries, while obviously top of mind from councillors, I think Hamish has made it clear they're not relevant to today's matter, but worthwhile mentioning that anyway, and can be picked up at the next committee meeting. Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Richard, thank you very much for your opening remarks. They were a helpful overview there. I took particular encouragement from your comments around how you felt the alignment was strong between Kiwi Rail, Auckland Transport, NZTA. So I guess, and you know, we've alluded to the question now, it's about the NZTA funding, right? So could I just ask a question around that alignment, continuing on that theme about the alignment with the government policy statement for transport? Because in my mind, I'm thinking the more we're aligned there, the more likely we are to pick up funding. So just if you want to make any comment around that alignment, and how closely we're aligned with that overall.
Well, I have heard through a third party that the fact that we have listened to Aucklanders and state highways have gone from 4 to 3 has met with the pleasure of the Minister. So little things like that, while in the end actually that is not going to make any difference on the money we get for Auckland Transport, because that's 100% funded by NZTA and is kind of separate from the funding that we will get for public transport in our other areas. I think that the themes in the GPS we have to a certain extent reflected in the RLTP, and by legislation we have to be consistent with the GPS, and my view as Chair is that we are.
Okay, good answer. Councillor Hills?
Thank you, Chair. So just a few questions. Just why did, maybe it's for Hamish, why did we not take the feedback that 80% of Aucklanders supported the current direction? Why did we move to the follow-on question, which was about priorities? Because if you look at the way state highways were funded already, it's clear they already were funded far higher than local roads and safety and cycling. So I'm just a bit confused why we've taken 80% of Aucklanders support our draft LTP and then move quite significantly.
Well, I mean, we all also asked them what their preferences were in terms of the sort of types of investment, because, you know, this is, after all, really a document that's focused on what are the priorities for investment for Auckland. So that's something we wanted to test. So that's a refinement of the overall support. And given that we got that feedback, then we've made the adjustment to the ranking.
But I guess I'm a bit confused. Moving $12 billion worth of state highways up where cycling was already funded around 600 or 700 million, it's clear that those priorities were already the priorities. Like state highways were overwhelmingly prioritised over things like cycling anyway.
Well, that's not the case, with respect. In the draft ranking, the state highway projects generally sat in the, in the third sort of quartile. So they were generally ranked lower than, around about 60 out of 113. So, yeah, they came quite low in the program, and what we've done now is to reflect that that feedback is elevated them up and rank by between sort of 20 and 30 ranks out of 113.
And just on when you mix the GPS and the RLTP together though, our priority is public transport infrastructure, but as far as I can see it, the RLTP will fund 30%. We're likely to be funded 30% of our public transport infrastructure, but about 100% of state highway activity with the GPS.
Yes, and that's something that is beyond our control. But what we are saying, essentially through this plan, is we're saying back to NZTA and we're saying back to the government, and this comes back to the point about alignment, that we recognise that, you want to put the bulk of your funding into state highways and a relatively limited amount into public transport, but we are saying that, hey, we see public transport infrastructure as a higher priority, and we've got the public behind us. We've tested, we've had 13,000 submissions. So in as much as NZTA can move money around, I guess what we're saying to the NZTA board is we would like you to assign more money towards that key priority of public transport infrastructure, And potentially that might come at the expense of state highways in the first 3 years because that part of the program is under less pressure. So we are actually kind of asking the GPS to be, asking NZTA to use their flexibility within the GPS activity classes to align with Auckland's priorities.
Just last question, Chair, just on climate. So this is obviously moving $12 billion of state highways forward is going to make emissions much, much worse. So have we modelled how bad it makes our emissions profile? And also, we mentioned the government, and I guess we've accepted that they're going to lean harder into the ETS. What that, is that, are we expected to be sort of $4, $5, $6 a litre of petrol by the end of the LTP if we lean harder into the ETS?
No, we haven't been able to do that modelling in the time that's available. So I can't say whether the state highway investment's going to increase or decrease the tailpipe emissions profile at this point.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ferry?
Hilda, sorry, I'm just having a little technical issue here, but hopefully you can see and hear me now. So my question is really around the issue I've raised in the past repeatedly around level crossings in the RLTP. And how have you, since the last conversation we had, where I again raised at the moment we only really have Takanini in there, what changes, if any, have been made as a result of our last discussion?
Well, as a result of the additional funding approved at the end of the long-term plan process, we've increased the allocation to Takanini from 50 million to 550 million. We've still got the allocation in to support CRL day one operations. But beyond that, we haven't been able to do anything further in terms of funding towards the rail crossings issue. We did hear that as a key part of stakeholder feedback, and we recognise it's an issue that needs to be addressed. But that's kind of beyond the funding capacity that we have at this point.
Okay, so confirming then that no changes have been made since the last conversation about it, because that LTP addition for Takanini was prior to the last conversation we had about it. Sorry, I've got quite a lot of background noise from my kids, so I'll keep it really brief. But how would you suggest, given that the RLTP is our 10-year bid to government for what our priorities are, and given what a high priority addressing level crossings is going to be for both the Western and the Southern line for our region, how do you suggest that we progress that conversation with central government if we are not capturing it in the RLTP?
I think the way to progress that is through the forthcoming work on the 30-year Auckland Integrated Transport Plan. That requirement for additional funding is of the kind of scale that it really needs to be discussed at a strategic level. What we have been able to do in terms of AT's program aligns with the priorities for investment that were agreed in the long-term plan. So we're aligned to the long-term plan here in those decisions. But the bigger question about the removal of level crossings across the entire network is something that we really need to have a strategic discussion with government.
So if it's not, sorry, last question, Chair, on this. Don't worry, I won't bother you with any others. On the, if it's not reflected in the 10-year plan, but we're putting it into a discussion that's a 30-year time frame, does that mean that we are giving up on doing it in the first 10 years?
Not necessarily. I think, and we don't know about the scope of the 30-year plan work, but my assumption is that one of the things that we will be testing is, okay, of the things beyond what's in the RLTP, what is the priority and timing of those? Because I think we need to recognise that with the RLTP bid, particularly for Auckland Transport's program, it's essentially constrained by what council can fund, council's funding share in the long-term plan. And even though council has significantly increased its allocation towards capital, we clearly can't do everything. So I think that's the point, to have a discussion about what happens beyond what can be achieved through the long-term plan and AT's program.
Okay, thank you. Look forward to some support from AT in that 30-year discussion.
Councillor Henderson?
Thank you, Chair. Does this RLTP align with this council's climate goals?
I think it aligns insofar as they're captured in the long-term plan, because as Auckland Transport's program aligns with the direction of that long-term plan and the SOI as they come through.
Did you prepare any test case RLTP that would not result in increasing emissions?
Well, as I said, we haven't modelled the emissions impact of this plan, and that's partially A, time constraints, and B, well, as I said, it's a $63 billion program. We're not likely to receive funding from it, so one of the challenges is what is the actual outcome going to be when we receive the funding. And we're not going to have a real sense of that until after NZTA has completed the National Land Transport Plan, and then we'll have a better sense of what can actually be funded. And I think there is where we'll be wanting to really test what the emissions outcome looks like over the next 10 years.
Do you have a unit that models climate emissions as a result of AT's policies, or how does that work?
Typically, we model tailpipe climate emissions using the macro strategic model.
So I remember in the discussions of the draft RLTP and the workshops, I was one of many councillors that actually raised this issue, and I think I asked the exact same questions. That's been a little while. I mean, is there any specific reason why we didn't go ahead and look at the emissions profiles?
I think I should say that emissions has been one of the key, strategic outcomes that the RLTP program has been prioritised against, and of course also it's been prioritised against the faster, more reliable public transport outcomes. So these are two key areas where we're driving mode shift and looking to see emissions reduction. So that has been a big input into the way that we've looked after the prioritisation of the RLTP, and you can see it coming through in the fact that of all the discretionary projects, the PT infrastructure has emerged as the highest priority. That said, we simply have not had the time or opportunity, and hasn't been, given the uncertainty about what the funding outcome is going to be, we haven't actually modelled the whole program.
Thanks. And my last question, Chair. I just want us to be super clear with the Auckland public about this that are very concerned. So can I just be crystal clear on this? We don't know whether this RLTP will result in increased or decreased emissions. We just don't have the evidence. Is that true?
I expect that overall, given what we've seen from previous RLTPs, we will see a reduction in emissions. Now, that could be, a very modest reduction in emissions, but what we are proposing, is a very significant increase in public transport services, public transport infrastructure.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Lee?
Thank you, and congratulations to the report authors. One small point, 503 million to support the delivery of the Takanini level crossings is kind of pitched as a public transport investment, if I could use that word. But in effect, it actually will mean freeing up the local roads, not the trains. The trains already have right of way, but quite often when it comes to level crossings, it's seen as a train issue in the sense of capacity, reliability, frequency, blah, blah, blah. My question is, should that not really be pitched, if we're going to be completely frank, as a road improvement rather than a rail improvement?
I think, fair point, we probably haven't captured the fact that that will deliver, some significant benefits to that local area in terms of removing the kind of congestion and impacts of the level crossings and the higher frequencies down there. So yes, that's something we can look to do in terms of a modification. I would say though that it does also deliver, public transport improvements, reduces some safety risk, and fundamentally in the long term, if we want to get future increases in capacity and frequency on the network beyond what we'll achieve on CRL day one, we need to address these level crossings. So it still does deliver public transport benefits.
I think, though, I am correct. This is really essentially a road improvement, and obviously needed, not really a rail improvement.
Okay, I think it's been moved by the Mayor and seconded. I think Councillor Fletcher indicated a willingness to second it. We'll open it up to debate now. Thank you, Richard, Hamish and the team. A very helpful presentation and for getting this all before us today. So, okay, I think there's only a desire from the Mayor, perhaps as the mover, you would perhaps like to sum up your sense of things.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Auckland Transport, together with Auckland Council, NZTA and Kiwi Rail have put a lot of effort into this RLTP. It's been a long process under trying timelines, given the late timing of the GPS. The RLTP initially took high-level direction from my mayoral proposal for transport, which laid out the headline funding numbers. AT have engaged with us several times through this process, as the numbers have inevitably moved around. The TIC committee, and thank you, have specifically requested joint development of the RLTP back in August last year. We wanted a new collaborative way of developing the RLTP. There certainly has been an improvement on previous RLTPs, and Auckland Transport has been listening to us. However, at the same time, it is clear that the AT board, through the Regional Transport Committee, is really in charge in making the decisions, which is understandable as that is what the law says. Next time, I am determined that Auckland Council should be really leading the RLTP with input from AT and NZTA, so there is proper democratic oversight of transport in Auckland, just like every other council. And I am talking to the government on this matter. I also acknowledge the RLTP is required to be consistent with the GPS on land transport, which makes it difficult for AT. This means government projects that I'm not at all convinced by have been ranked much higher than I would have liked, given the lack of evidence provided so far as to their benefits. In particular, with state highways, I think the 3.5 uplift to big projects would be better off at 2.5. Nevertheless, there are also a few AT projects in here that I'm not convinced by, and this will be the same for everyone. I'm sure the projects that I don't like have supporters around the table. So overall, I feel that AT have got the balance about right, and that everyone should have some projects to be happy about. I just request that the AT board closely scrutinise the projects to make sure they stack up and are good value for money before giving them the final go-ahead. We have to see the bigger picture here. There's a lot in here to like. Just a few highlights are: we're getting faster progress on dynamic lanes and network optimisation, improving unsealed roads. There's $5.5 billion to prevent potholes or repair potholes on our roads and keep assets in good order, which oddly enough is called MOR and resilience, maintenance, operations and renewals and resilience. Renewals being the word there that's most loved. There are funding for numerous projects that will make public transport faster, more reliable and easier to use. There is funding for a range of rail initiatives which will help make the most of CRL. We finally funded the much needed grade separation of level crossings in Takanini, which is a safety and local road improvement. So that's why I'll be voting today to endorse the RLTP. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor Hills.
Thank you. Just be quick. In the survey feedback, 79% of people said we have correctly identified the challenges. Under the question, are we missing anything from the draft priorities? 70% said no. Are there missing projects? 72% said no. For some reason, we've gone through and then chosen the fourth question, which was around priorities, and a 0.25 difference in categories meant that now we have moved $12 billion worth of state highways up 30 points into the RLTP priorities. And if you look at the GPS mixed in with that, only 30% of our public transport infrastructure gets funded. And I know that's not AT's fault, that is the GPS direction, but 100% of the state highways get funded. And in this document it says we will have to lean harder into the ETS to get that. What that means for our households and residents is higher emissions, poorer air quality, and we will not meet any of our goals. We will not meet Te Tarakia Tawhiri, and it will mean much higher petrol costs, much higher energy costs. And you see from the government's emissions reduction plan announced last week that we are not going to meet even our nationwide goals on climate. So although I obviously support a lot of the projects in here, I find it impossible to support this. And I think this is maybe the third or fourth, must be the third RLTP that we have asked for emissions modelling. We have asked for feedback on this, and every time we don't get that. So it is a bit disappointing, but I'm just think we've moved too far when you look at, we had already deprioritised walking and cycling by being about 1% of the overall budget or 2%. So, yeah, I'm not sure I can support this at all. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Baker.
Yeah, I suppose in terms of process, I mean, we play the cards we dealt. And so obviously Chris and I are a lot closer to this and put in a huge amount. There's been a huge amount of work. And so firstly, I just want to acknowledge the work that has gone on. And so from both Auckland Council and Auckland Transport and Kiwi Rail, NZTA, the hours that have been put in trying to get to what is a very, very balanced RLTP, I just really want to acknowledge it and the leadership of Richard and the attitude of the board to actually try and get to a point where we are putting up what has been described as a pretty balanced RLTP. Yes, some people will be disappointed, just as people were disappointed last time with where the priorities were. And just in regards to the state highways, you know, we cannot think of state highways as sitting outside our roading network. They are a huge, huge, huge part of our roading network. And, you know, I think there are 6 in Auckland, and you can go 16 and 18, 20, 22. They service huge parts of our region. And, you know, this is not just something, and it doesn't matter what sort of vehicle you are driving, anything with wheels requires, with how they are aspirated, needs to have a nice little road to drive on. So I just want to acknowledge the huge amount of effort that has gone into this, and we will never please all of the people all of the time, just as the last one didn't. So I'll be voting to endorse this, oddly enough, but you know, just want to thank the people that have worked so hard to put this together. It's a pretty good result. And when Maurice Williamson sending me text messages going, it's quite good, or it's good, boy, there's a risk. Oh, sorry. And for the mayor to actually, I think there was a vague compliment to Auckland Transport in amongst that. Geez, we must have done something right.
Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really conflicted and I've got sort of knots in my stomach over this. Like I was really heartened that we opened the debate with the really simple proposition that Aucklanders should be running their own transport system. They should have direct control over the future of their network. They should elect the politicians with promises that those politicians will have that control and will deliver on the promises they make on the campaign trail and have the ability to do so. So I thought that was a great way to start. We need proper democratic oversight of the RLTP. This is one of the things that's sort of really getting in my mind here. Because, you know, the Mayor did say there's a lot to like here, and I agree. There is a lot to like here. The dynamic lanes thing's great. Some of the public transport stuff that we've got in here is absolutely long overdue, desperately needs investment. So that's good. I don't want to be the one that goes against that. So I'm conflicted because we pass this today. I have to step out of this room and I have to give my public, I have to give Aucklanders confidence that we're moving in the right direction on climate change. I have repeatedly asked at this table, over and over again. I asked in the workshops, I asked in the draft RLTP discussions, I said, can we get modelling on this? Can we say that this RLTP will meet our climate goals or it won't? That's all I'm asking. I want clear answers on that. I've repeatedly advocated as an idea for a test case to say, look, this is an RLTP that absolutely does. It's just going to cost you a lot of money. So we can test that back and we say, actually, we can use this and we can assess our own proposals, right? That work hasn't been done. I want to know why, and without that, I'm struggling to support this. I just don't know how to register this concern because I've only got one vote. It's black and white. I vote it yes or I vote it no, right? And I'm a bloody broken record on this issue over and over again. I don't know, I'd appreciate the guidance of my colleagues on this, and I'll just be listening. I hope there's more debate because I'll be listening very intently into that. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, any other speakers? Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. This is actually quite difficult, but I sit here as a councillor, but I'm also your councillor along with Councillor Baker at the board. I have seen the correspondence to the board chair from the Mayor representing the TIC feedback and his own feedback. And one of the areas was expressing concern about the elevation of the state highways and RONs. They've been lifted significantly to the point that Councillor Hills and Councillor Henderson were making. I'm not one for sitting on fences or walking out of the room to avoid a vote. That is really, really weak. It puts me in a very difficult position here because I am your AT director, and what you're seeing here today is the collective view of the board that I sit on. And I will be supporting the collective view of the board, but tell you that I did represent the view of TIC and the Mayor in his letter to the board chair last week when this was being considered by the board. And I made a very clear point about the elevation of state highways and RONs. There, as Councillor Hills rightly pointed out, there is no evidence. There is no evidence that there is great support for elevating as has been done. There is none. It's entirely absent. You would have to scrape the bottom of the survey to find evidence of such. You'd have to go right to the bottom of the barrel. And you'd be scraping for a while before you found any shards of evidence for elevating state highways and RONs. It's contrary to the feedback. And all that said, I am not going to sit on the fence. I'm not going to exit the room. That is weak. But I sit here as your Auckland councillor and AT representative. You put me there, the AT board has made its decision, and I will stick with that decision. It's a difficult one, but that's the game. That's the game. Otherwise, I would be in breach of the responsibility that you have given me to be an AT board member. So I will be supporting it.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Darby. Any other speakers? Okay, well, Councillor Bartley.
I'll keep mine short. I didn't leave my dying mother's hospital bed in June 2019 to come and vote for a climate emergency to then sit here and support a transport plan that is not a transport plan for a city that is in a climate emergency. So I also don't believe that you can keep building all these different roads to get on top of congestion. While I appreciate the chair of Auckland Transport's letter to us, that the vision is for people to get to places within 20 minutes, I believe the higher priority is that people get to places safely. And safety is a low priority in this plan compared to the runs. So I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Okay, that's a,
I'll speak to it then, John.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Look, I'll speak in favour of the endorsement. I want to highlight that this fixes Auckland's transport infrastructure. It gets Auckland moving. It increases productivity for businesses. It makes life easier for people. And at the end of the day, it will stop wasting money. Thank you.
Up with a couple of brief comments myself as chair, and I guess in response to Councillor Henderson's sort of challenge really to the committee. I'll make a couple of comments on the implications of not endorsing the RLTP there, and we heard from Hamish then what that would mean is that the 2021 RLTP would remain in effect. This would mean Auckland would not have an RLTP that reflects the most recent council or government priorities and would significantly weaken the case for funding AT's program along with investments by NZTA and KiwiRail. That's a reality of not endorsing it. I guess from a more perspective, what it would also mean is that you wouldn't end up including the provision in the RLTP for existing public transport services, along with improvements such as more rail services for the City Rail Link and the expansion of the frequent bus network. You wouldn't be supporting that, as well as the maintenance and enhancement renewal for local roads that serve our wards and rail. For that matter, wouldn't support completing the City Rail Link or the big bus projects like the Eastern Busway, the Takanini rail crossings, Northwest Rapid Transit, and for tracking of the Southern Line. And I guess again on a more practical, granular level, it wouldn't support the significant investment in the delivery of and the quick delivery of small-scale public transport projects such as bus optimisation and dynamic lanes and station upgrades. That this is all quoting virtually verbatim from the paper, and programs to optimise the performance of the local road network, and really when you get down to it, safety and walking and cycling programs, that would not be getting endorsed. As far as the issue of the apparent elevation of the state highways, that's 100% funded by NZTA. We went out to public consultation. If we're to have good faith with that public consultation, as we have done in reflecting the overwhelming desire for public transport infrastructure investment, which is reflected in the plan, we also have to reflect what else was said. And in that respect, if you look at the relevant data on page 100 and whatever it is, 148 of the attachment, there is a clear preference there. If we go to comparisons between walking and cycling, for instance, 17% walking and cycling, 9% safety. As far as state highways goes, 25%, and if you take the first and second ranking, it becomes even more obvious, 43% for state highways, 24 for safety, 37 for walking and cycling. So that, in reality, is a relatively small change, which, in the scheme of things, doesn't alter our overwhelming emphasis on public transport. And as I said, it's a priority that goes to a category that is entirely funded and controlled by NZTA. So I hope that gives some brief sense of what not endorsing this goes. You default essentially to the AT board, and you essentially don't endorse all the good stuff. And then there's stuff in there that I don't like. I'm not too happy about the ongoing kind of ranking of Glenvar Road, but everyone will have their own projects that fall into that category. Overall, it needs to be endorsed. We know that in all probability, Hamish and the team are going to be back here in a month or so's time with a significantly reduced program that reflect the reality on the ground, will be quite different from the 60-odd billion bid. It is a bid. And I think if we're going to be fair and reflect that, then a number of the arguments become rather academic, because there's going to be a culling back significantly of the program as a whole. All right, having said that, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of endorsement, please say aye. Aye. Against?
Aye.
And abstentions. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance. Sorry to our guests for having to wait so long. And safe trip home. Get down to Britomart in those trains and those buses. Missed our ferry. The ferry's gone. I've missed my ferry.
Hi everyone.